Harper's bare feet barely made a sound against the moss-covered earth as she ran. The moon hung low and full above the pines, casting silver shadows that twisted and stretched like grasping fingers. Behind her, the ceremonial hall blazed with torchlight and the low hum of gathered voices, but she couldn't hear them anymore. Only her own ragged breathing and the hammer of her heart filled her ears. She pressed one hand against her ribs as she ran, feeling the heat beneath her skin. The mark burned there, hidden under layers of ash and careful wrapping, a secret she'd kept for 3 long years. Tonight it had awakened fully, responding to the ceremony she'd tried so hard to avoid, and the pain had driven her from the hall in blind panic. Before we begin this journey together, if stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe so you never miss another tale of love and fate. The forest swallowed her whole as she plunged deeper into the darkness. Branches caught at her ceremonial dress, the pale fabric tearing against rough bark, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Not when she knew he would come for her. Not when every instinct screamed that running was the only choice she had left. A howl split the night behind her, deep and commanding, and her steps faltered. She knew that voice, had known it since she was 15, since the first time she'd seen Lucian Thorn stand before the pack as their Alpha King. The sound rolled through the trees like thunder, calling her back, demanding her return. Harper's throat tightened. She ran harder. The mark flared hotter, as if it could hear him too, as if it recognized the voice of the one who had made it. Her hands shook as she grabbed at tree trunks to steady herself, her palms scraping against bark, her feet stumbling over roots she couldn't see in the dark. She had watched him choose someone else. 2 years ago at the harvest gathering, she had stood in the crowd and seen him place his hand on another woman's shoulder, had seen him lean close and whisper something that made the woman smile. The memory was burned into her mind as deeply as the mark was burned into her skin. It hadn't mattered that Harper had felt the pull even then, the invisible thread that tied her to him. It hadn't mattered that her wolf had whined and paced inside her chest, restless and longing. He had chosen, and it wasn't her. So she had hidden the mark, packed ash and herbs against it every morning, wrapped cloth tight around her ribs, and told no one. Not her mother, not her closest friend, not even the healer who sometimes looked at her with worried eyes. Tonight, the elders had called every unmated wolf of age to the ceremonial hall. They said the Alpha King would finally choose his queen, that the pack needed the stability of a bonded pair. Harper had gone because refusing would have drawn attention she couldn't afford. She had stood at the back of the hall, wrapped in a borrowed dress, and prayed he wouldn't notice her. But the moment he'd stepped into the firelight, the mark had roared to life. It felt like lightning beneath her skin, white-hot and undeniable. She'd gasped and doubled over, clutching her side, and when she'd looked up, Lucian's eyes had been locked on her. His nostrils had flared. His entire body had gone still, predatory, and focused, and she'd known with terrible certainty that he could sense it. So she'd run. Now the trees thinned ahead, and Harper could hear the rush of water, the border stream. If she crossed it, she'd be in unclaimed territory, and pack law said he couldn't follow without her consent. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself faster, her legs shaking with exhaustion. She broke through the tree line and stumbled down the bank. The water gleamed black under the moonlight, cold and quick. She didn't let herself hesitate. She stepped in, gasping at the icy shock, and waded forward. The current pulled at her dress, dragging the fabric heavy around her legs. Halfway across, her strength gave out. Harper's knees buckled, and she fell forward, catching herself on her hands in the shallow rapids. The cold water numbed her fingers instantly. Her chest heaved as she tried to breathe, tried to force her body to move. But everything hurt. The mark, her feet, her hands, her heart. She heard the soft splash of footsteps behind her and knew without looking that he had found her. Harper. His voice was low, careful, nothing like the commanding howl that had chased her through the forest. Don't go further. She closed her eyes and stayed where she was, kneeling in the stream with water rushing around her thighs. Her hair had come loose from its braid and hung in wet tangles around her face. Please, she whispered, just let me go. I can't. The water rippled as he moved closer, but he didn't touch her. You know I can't. Harper forced herself to look back over her shoulder. Lucian stood 3 feet away, the water lapping at his boots. He'd removed his ceremonial cloak and wore only a simple shirt and dark trousers, both already damp from the spray. His black hair was tied back from his face, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the striking gray of his eyes. Even now, even terrified and exhausted, she couldn't stop herself from noticing how beautiful he was. Tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace that marked him as Alpha. His presence filled the space around them, commanding without effort. But it was his expression that made her chest ache. He looked lost, confused, almost hurt. Why did you run? He asked quietly. From the ceremony. From me. She shook her head and turned away, staring down at her hands in the water. Blood seeped from her palms where the bark had torn skin, dark ribbons dissolving into the current. You felt it, Lucian continued. I know you did. The bond. I felt it the moment I entered the hall, and I saw your face. He paused. You've known, for longer than tonight. It wasn't a question. Harper's jaw tightened. The mark pulsed hot against her ribs, responding to his nearness, crying out for connection even as she tried to deny it. She pressed her hand harder against her side. 3 years, she said finally, her voice barely audible over the water. I've known for 3 years. The silence that followed was heavy. She heard him draw in a slow breath, heard the soft rustle of fabric as he shifted his weight. 3 years, he repeated. And you told no one, hid it. Yes. Why? The question was so simple, so genuinely bewildered, that something cracked open inside her chest. Harper pushed herself up to her knees, swaying slightly, and met his eyes. The moonlight caught the silver in them, made them glow. Because you chose someone else, she said. The words came out harder than she intended, edged with old pain. 2 years ago, I saw you. Lucian's brow furrowed. Harper, I haven't chosen anyone. Tonight was supposed to be the harvest gathering, she interrupted. You stood with a woman, tall, dark hair. You touched her shoulder and leaned close, and she smiled at you like... Harper's voice cracked. Like she was yours. Understanding flashed across his face, followed immediately by something that looked like horror. That was Serena, he said. My cousin. She'd just told me she was carrying her first child. He took a step closer, his hands lifting as if he wanted to reach for her. Harper. It was a family moment, nothing more. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. Harper stared at him, her mind racing back to that day, replaying the scene with new context. His cousin. A baby. Not a romantic claim at all. I didn't know, she whispered. How could you? Lucian's voice was gentle now, devastatingly gentle. You were standing too far away to hear. And He exhaled slowly. I didn't even know you then. Not your name, not your face. I've been searching for my mate since I turned 25 years now. And every gathering I hoped. He trailed off. If I'd known it was you, if I'd felt the bond then, I would never have let you believe something so wrong. Harper's eyes burned. She wanted to believe him. Everything in her ached to believe him. But 3 years of certainty, of resignation, didn't dissolve in an instant. "The mark," she said. "It came that same season. And I thought—" She pressed her palm flat against her ribs. "I thought maybe it was broken, or cruel, to tie me to someone who wanted another." "Let me see it." Lucian moved closer, slow and careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Please." Her hands trembled as she pulled the torn fabric of her dress aside, revealing the cloth wrapping beneath. The mark was burning so hot now she could barely stand it. With shaking fingers, she unwound the binding, letting the ash-stained linen fall into the water. The mark blazed across her ribs in lines of silver-gold light, intricate and unmistakable, the symbol of the thorn line, the Alpha's mark, like a brand of moonlight against her skin. Lucian made a sound low in his throat, something between a gasp and a growl, his eyes fixed on the mark with an intensity that made her shiver. "It's beautiful," he breathed. "You're beautiful." Behind them, Harper heard the rustle of movement at the tree line. She looked up sharply and saw them, dozens of wolves emerging from the forest, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The pack had followed their alpha, drawn by his howl and the scent of something momentous happening. Her breath caught. The elder wolves stood at the front, their fur gray and silver with age. Behind them, younger pack members crowded close, watching with bright, curious eyes. Lucian must have sensed them too, but he didn't turn around. His gaze stayed locked on Harper, on the mark that proved what she'd tried so hard to hide. The first rays of dawn broke over the eastern ridge, spilling golden light through the trees. It touched the water first, turning the stream to liquid amber, and then climbed higher, reaching for them. When the light hit Harper's mark, it flared like a struck match, brilliant and undeniable, visible to every watching eye. A murmur ran through the assembled pack. Harper heard gasps, whispers, the soft whine of wolves recognizing what they were seeing. Lucian knelt in the water beside her, his movement fluid and deliberate. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he laid his palm gently over the mark. His hand was warm. The touch sent a shock of sensation through her entire body, and the mark sang in response, the light pulsing brighter beneath his fingers. "I have searched for you," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the water to the watching pack. "Every moon since my 20th year. I have walked through every gathering, every celebration, hoping to feel what I feel now." His thumb brushed gently across her skin. "You are mine, Harper, and if you'll let me, I am yours." Harper's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words settled over her like a physical thing, warm and terrifying all at once. Around them, the pack stood silent, waiting, and she could feel the enormity of this moment pressing down on her shoulders. Lucian's hand remained steady over her mark, his touch grounding her even as everything else spun out of control. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was some kind of mistake. But all she saw was certainty, a quiet, unshakable truth that made her chest ache. "I don't understand," she whispered. "All this time, you never felt anything? Never sensed the bond?" His expression softened with something that looked like regret. The bond doesn't always wake for both at the same time. Sometimes one knows years before the other. He shifted closer, his other hand coming up to brush a strand of wet hair from her face. "I felt the potential in you tonight. The possibility. But you." His thumb traced the edge of the mark, making her shiver. "You've been carrying the full weight of it alone for 3 years. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. Harper's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back since the moment she'd run from the hall. It hurt, she admitted. Watching you, believing you'd chosen someone else. It hurt so much I couldn't breathe sometimes. I know. Lucian's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. If I could go back, if I could have found you sooner. You couldn't have known. The words came out softer than she intended. I hid it. I wrapped it and covered it and made sure no one could see. Why didn't you come to me? He asked it without judgment, genuine confusion coloring his tone. Even believing what you did, you could have confronted me, demanded answers. Harper looked away, shame heating her face. Because I'm nobody. The daughter of a seamstress and a woodworker. You're the Alpha King. She gestured vaguely at the assembled pack behind them. What right did I have to claim you? Lucian made a low sound of frustration. His hand left her mark to cup her chin, gently turning her face back toward his. You have every right. The bond doesn't care about status or bloodlines. It chooses what it chooses. His eyes held hers, fierce and unwavering. You are my mate, Harper. That makes you my equal in every way that matters. The words settled into her chest, finding all the hollow places she'd learned to ignore. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it frightened her. Behind them, one of the elder wolves shifted back into human form. Harper recognized Marin, the eldest of the council, a woman whose silver hair hung past her waist and whose eyes had seen more seasons than most of the pack combined. She stepped forward, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and stopped at the water's edge. Alpha, Marin said quietly, the pack needs to hear you speak it clearly. No room for doubt. Lucian didn't look away from Harper. Will you stand with me? Harper's legs trembled as she tried to rise. The cold water and exhaustion had stolen most of her strength. Before she could fall, Lucian's arm came around her waist, steady and sure, lifting her to her feet as easily as if she weighed nothing. She swayed against him, her torn feet unsteady on the rocky streamed. His warmth seeped through her wet dress, chasing away some of the chill that had settled into her bones. She could feel the solid strength of him, the carefully controlled power in every line of his body. I've got you, he murmured. I won't let you fall. Harper's hand came up instinctively to rest against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart beat strong and steady. The rhythm of it seemed to sync with her own, two separate pulses finding the same cadence. Lucian turned them both to face the shore, his arm still secure around her waist. The pack had grown larger, more wolves emerging from the forest to witness what was happening. Harper saw faces she recognized. Neighbors, friends, people she'd known her whole life. They watched with expressions ranging from shock to joy to careful curiosity. Her mother stood near the back, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When their eyes met, her mother nodded, just once, and the gesture carried more permission and blessing than any words could have. Lucian drew in a slow breath. When he spoke, his voice carried across the water and into the trees beyond, clear and commanding. I, Lucian Thorne, Alpha of the Crescent Pack, claim Harper Wilde as my true mate. His hand splayed across her ribs, over the still glowing mark. Witnessed by blood and bond, sealed by the mark of my line, recognized under moon and sun. The formal words rang out like a vow. Harper felt them settle into her skin, into the mark itself, making it flare brighter. She is mine to protect, Lucian continued, mine to cherish, mine to stand beside as equal and partner. He paused, his next words softer but no less weighted. And I am hers, in all the same ways, for as long as we both live. The silence that followed felt sacred. Harper could hear nothing but the rush of water and the hammer of her own heart. Then, slowly, the pack began to respond. First, one wolf howled. Then another, then a dozen, until the sound rose into a chorus that echoed through the forest. It was a song of recognition, of celebration, of acceptance. The sound wrapped around Harper like an embrace, and she felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light she hadn't known she'd been missing. Marin stepped into the shallow water, moving with careful dignity despite her age. She stopped in front of them and reached out to touch the mark on Harper's ribs. Her fingers were cool and gentle. "The bond is true," Marin said, loud enough for all to hear. "The mark is genuine. I witness it and name it valid before the pack." She withdrew her hand and smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. The alpha has found his queen. More howls rose, joyful and raucous. Some of the younger wolves shifted and laughed, calling out congratulations. Harper saw her mother push through the crowd, still crying, her face bright with happiness. But beneath the celebration, Harper felt the sharp edge of her own fear. This was real now, public, undeniable. There was no more hiding, no more running. She had been claimed in front of the entire pack, and the weight of what that meant pressed down on her like a stone. Lucian must have sensed her tension because his arm tightened around her waist. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You're shaking." "I'm cold," she said, which was true, but not the whole truth, and afraid. She didn't deny it. Lucian pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "We don't have to go back to the hall. Not yet. Not until you're ready." His thumb rubbed small circles against her side, soothing. "But I need to get you somewhere warm and tend to your feet. You're bleeding." Harper looked down and saw he was right. Dark spots of blood swirled in the water around her feet, mixing with the current. She'd run so hard and so far that she'd torn the skin to ribbons, but the adrenaline had kept her from feeling the worst of it. Now, standing still, the pain began to seep in. "Come on," Lucian said gently. He moved carefully, guiding her toward the shore. "I've got you." Harper leaned into him because she had no choice. Her legs barely held her weight. Each step sent sharp sparks of pain up through her feet, but Lucian's strength kept her upright. When they reached the bank, Marin stepped aside and gestured toward the trees. "The Alpha's private cabin is closest. A 10-minute walk if you carry her." Lucian didn't hesitate. He swept Harper up into his arms, cradling her against his chest as easily as if she were made of air. She gasped and grabbed at his shoulders, her fingers digging into the damp fabric of his shirt. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "You can barely stand." He adjusted his grip, settling her more comfortably. "Let me do this." Harper's throat tightened. She wasn't used to being cared for like this, wasn't used to anyone seeing her pain and moving to ease it without being asked. It made her feel vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the bond or the mark or the audience of watching wolves. Lucian turned toward the forest, but before he could take a step, Harper's mother rushed forward. She stopped just in front of them, her eyes red-rimmed but shining. "Mama," Harper whispered. Her mother reached up to cup Harper's face with trembling hands. "My sweet girl. I knew something was wrong. I knew you were hurting." She brushed a thumb across Harper's cheek. "But I never guessed. I never imagined." "I'm sorry," Harper said. "I should have told you." "Hush." Her mother smiled through fresh tears. "You did what you thought you had to do. But you don't have to hide anymore." She looked up at Lucian, her expression shifting to something more assessing. "You'll take care of her." It wasn't a question, but Lucian answered anyway. "With everything I am." Harper's mother studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. She stepped back, her hands falling away. Go, get her warm and safe. We'll handle the rest. Lucian inclined his head, in respect, then turned and carried Harper into the forest. The pack parted to let them through, faces blurring past as exhaustion finally began to pull at Harper's awareness. She let her head rest against Lucian's shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and the soft crunch of his boots on the forest floor. The celebration continued behind them, howls and laughter fading into the distance. But here, wrapped in Lucian's arms with dawn breaking golden through the trees, Harper felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 3 long years. She felt safe. The cabin emerged from the forest like something out of a dream. It was small and built of dark timber, nestled in a clearing where wildflowers grew in thick patches despite the early season. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and warm light glowed through the windows. Someone had clearly been here recently, keeping the place ready. Lucian carried Harper up the 3 wooden steps to the door and pushed it open with his shoulder. The interior was simple but comfortable. A large bed dominated one corner, piled with furs and woven blankets. A stone hearth took up most of the opposite wall, flames already crackling cheerfully behind an iron grate. A small table and 2 chairs sat near the window, and shelves lined the walls, holding books and various necessities. He moved straight to the bed and set Harper down gently on the edge. She winced as her feet touched the floor, and he immediately knelt in front of her, his hands hovering near her ankles. "May I?" he asked quietly. Harper nodded, too tired to protest. She watched as he carefully lifted one foot, examining the damage with a healer's focus. His touch was feather-light, barely there, but she still hissed at the contact. "Bad?" she asked. "You've torn through several layers of skin. Some deeper cuts near the arch." He looked up at her, his gray eyes troubled. "You ran through the entire northern forest barefoot." I wasn't exactly thinking clearly. "No." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. "I don't suppose you were." He released her foot and stood. "Stay here. Don't move." He crossed to a cabinet near the hearth and pulled out a wooden box. When he returned, Harper saw it was filled with clean cloth, salves, and various herbs she recognized from her mother's work. Lucian knelt again and began pulling out what he needed, his movements efficient and practiced. "You've done this before," Harper observed. "I've patched up more wounded wolves than I can count." He uncorked a small jar, and the sharp scent of comfrey and yarrow filled the air. "Comes with the position." He cleaned her feet first, using water from a pitcher on the table and soft cloth that he tore into strips. Harper bit her lip against the sting, her hands fisting in the blankets beneath her. Lucian worked quickly but carefully, murmuring apologies when she flinched. "Tell me about it," he said as he spread salve across her worst cuts. "The 3 years. What was it like?" Harper wasn't sure she wanted to relive it, but his voice was so gentle, and the question felt less like curiosity and more like an offering. A chance to be heard. "Lonely," she said finally. "I felt split in half. Part of me knew what the mark meant, knew I was tied to you, but the other part kept insisting I had to be wrong, that it couldn't be real." She paused. "I started avoiding gatherings. Made excuses not to go anywhere I might see you." Lucian's hands stilled on her foot. "That's why I never saw you. Why I never sensed you in the crowd." "I stayed home. Helped my mother with her work. Kept my head down." "And the mark? It never stopped burning?" "No. Some days were worse than others." Harper looked down at her ribs, where the symbol still glowed faintly beneath her dress. During the full moon, it would flare so hot I could barely sleep. I'd pack snow against it in the winter just to dull the pain." Lucian made a low sound of distress. He finished wrapping her left foot and moved to the right, his jaw tight. "You should never have had to endure that alone. I chose it. You thought you had no other option." He tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels, looking up at her. "There's a difference." Harper met his eyes and found no judgment there, only a kind of fierce sorrow that made her chest ache. She had spent so long believing herself foolish, believing that hiding the mark had been a mistake born of cowardice. But the way Lucian looked at her now, he saw only someone who had been hurt and done her best to survive it. "Your hands," he said, breaking the silence. He held out his own, palms up, waiting. Harper placed her scraped palms in his. The cuts weren't as deep as the ones on her feet, but they stung fiercely. Lucian cleaned them with the same gentle efficiency, his fingers steady and sure. "That day at the harvest gathering," Harper said quietly, "when I saw you with your cousin, I went home and cried for hours. My mother found me in the garden and held me, and I couldn't tell her why I was breaking apart." She swallowed hard. "The next morning, I bought ash from the healer and started covering the mark. I told myself if I couldn't see it, maybe it would stop being real. But it didn't. No, it just lived under my skin. A secret that burned." Lucian finished wrapping her hands and set them carefully in her lap. Then he stood and moved to sit beside her on the bed, close but not touching. The mattress dipped under his weight. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." Harper's stomach tightened with fresh anxiety, but she nodded. Lucian turned slightly to face her, his expression serious. "The bond doesn't wake the same way for everyone. You felt it 3 years ago, fully formed, undeniable. But for me," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I felt potential, possibility, 1,000 half-formed connections that never quite solidified." He reached up to rub the back of his neck, a gesture that seemed almost self-conscious. "Every gathering, every meeting, I'd search for the one who would make the bond snap into place. I'd catch a scent or a glimpse of someone and think, maybe this time. But it never happened. Until tonight," Harper said softly. "Until tonight." His eyes found hers. "The moment I walked into that hall and caught your scent, everything locked into focus. Like I'd been seeing the world through fog, and suddenly it cleared." His hand lifted, hovering near her face, then dropped back to his lap. "I felt the bond slam into me so hard I could barely breathe. And then I saw you at the back of the room, saw the pain on your face, and I knew you'd been living with this for far longer than a single night." Harper's throat tightened. "You followed me." "Of course I did." He said it like there had never been any other option. "You ran, and every instinct I have screamed to go after you, to find you, to make sure you were safe." His jaw tightened. "When I saw you in the water, bleeding and exhausted, it took everything I had not to just drag you back to shore and refuse to let you go." "Why didn't you?" "Because you were terrified." Lucian's voice dropped, rough with emotion. "Of me, of this, and I won't force this bond on you, Harper. Not when you've already suffered so much because of it." The words hit her like a physical blow. Harper stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found only honesty. Raw, painful honesty. "You would let me go," she said slowly, "if I asked, even now, after claiming me in front of the pack." Lucian's expression tightened, but he nodded. "If that's what you truly wanted, yes, I would find a way. He looked down at his hands. It would destroy me, but I'd do it. Silence settled between them, heavy with things unsaid. Outside, Harper could hear birdsong and the distant sound of the pack still celebrating. But here, in this quiet cabin, there was only the crackle of the fire and the weight of a choice she'd never thought she'd have to make. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent hiding, the nights she'd lain awake, pressing her hand against the burning mark and wondering why fate had been so cruel. The jealousy that had eaten at her every time she'd heard Lucian's name, imagining him happy with someone else while she suffered alone. But she also thought about the way he'd knelt in the stream beside her, gentle and careful, asking instead of demanding. The way he'd carried her without hesitation, tended her wounds without complaint. The sorrow in his eyes when he'd realized how long she'd been hurting. This wasn't the Alpha King she'd built up in her mind over 3 years of fear and longing. This was just Lucian, a man who'd been searching for something he couldn't name, who'd been as lost in his own way as she'd been in hers. Harper reached up slowly and pressed her palm flat against the mark on her ribs. It pulsed warm beneath her touch, steady and sure. "I don't want to run anymore," she said quietly. Lucian's head snapped up, his eyes searching hers with desperate hope. "I'm tired of hiding, tired of hurting, tired of carrying this alone." Harper's voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "I don't know how to trust this yet. I don't know how to believe it's real after convincing myself for so long that it wasn't." She drew in a shaky breath. "But I want to try. If you'll be patient with me, I want to try." Something in Lucian's expression cracked open. Relief, joy, and a kind of reverent disbelief flickered across his face in quick succession. He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in both hands. "I will be so patient," he promised, his voice rough. "As long as you need. Years if that's what it takes." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You set the pace, Harper. Tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you." Harper's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back since the stream. "I don't know what I need." "That's all right." Lucian leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. "We'll figure it out together." The touch sent warmth cascading through Harper's entire body. Not the burning pain she'd grown used to, but something softer, comforting, like coming home after a long journey. She let her eyes close and just breathed with him, their foreheads pressed together, their breath mingling in the small space between them. Outside, the sun climbed higher into the morning sky. Inside, something fragile and new began to take root. When Lucian finally pulled back, his expression had settled into something calmer, more grounded. "You should rest," he said. "You're exhausted." Harper realized he was right. Now that the adrenaline had fully drained away, fatigue dragged at her limbs like weights. Her eyes felt heavy, her body hollowed out. "Will you stay?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucian stood and helped her shift back on the bed, arranging pillows behind her and pulling the blankets up. "Sleep. I'll be right here when you wake." Harper wanted to protest, wanted to stay awake and talk more, to understand everything that had happened in the past few hours. But her body had other ideas. The moment her head hit the pillow, darkness rushed up to claim her. The last thing she felt before sleep took her was Lucian's hand settling gently over hers, warm and steady and real. Harper woke to afternoon light filtering through the cabin windows, golden and warm. For a moment she lay still, disoriented, her mind struggling to piece together where she was and why her body ached in so many places at once. Then memory flooded back and she gasped, her hand flying to her ribs. The mark was still there, still warm beneath her fingers, but the burning pain had subsided to a gentle pulse, almost like a heartbeat that wasn't quite her own. She turned her head and found Lucian sitting in the chair by the window, watching her with quiet attention. He'd changed clothes while she slept, trading his damp ceremonial wear for simple dark trousers and a loose linen shirt. His hair was still tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face, and in the afternoon light his gray eyes looked almost silver. "How long was I asleep?" Harper's voice came out rough, and she winced. 4 hours, maybe 5. Lucian stood and crossed to the bed, moving with that same careful grace she'd noticed before. "There's water on the table. And food. When you're ready." Harper pushed herself up to sitting, grateful when he didn't try to help. Her bandaged feet throbbed dully, and her palms stung, but the rest had done her good. She felt more solid somehow, less like she might shatter at the slightest touch. Lucian handed her a clay cup filled with cool water, and she drank deeply, not realizing how thirsty she'd been until the liquid touched her tongue. When she finished, he took the cup and refilled it from a pitcher, then sat on the edge of the bed, leaving a respectful distance between them. "The pack is still celebrating," he said quietly. "Marin sent word that they've declared today a festival day. No work, just—" he gestured vaguely. "Joy, I suppose. Because of us." Harper looked down at her hands, at the clean white bandages wrapped around her palms. "Because their Alpha finally found his mate after 5 years of searching." Lucian's voice softened. "They've been worried. A pack needs stability, needs to know their leader is grounded and whole. The bond provides that." Harper thought about all the times she'd heard people in the village talking about the Alpha King, wondering when he would choose, speculating about who might catch his eye. She'd always changed the subject, or found an excuse to leave, unable to bear the conversation. "They must have been disappointed," she said, "when they realized it was just me." Lucian made a sound that was almost a growl. "Don't." His hand reached out, then stopped halfway, hovering in the space between them. "May I?" Harper nodded, not quite sure what she was agreeing to. Lucian took her bandaged hand carefully in both of his, cradling it like something precious. "You are not just anything," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You are my mate, the one person in this entire territory who fits against my soul like you were made for it." His thumbs brushed gently across her knuckles. "The pack understands that. They're celebrating because the bond chose true, not because of bloodlines or status." Harper wanted to believe him. The certainty in his voice made it almost possible. "What happens now?" she asked. "I mean, what are we supposed to do?" Lucian was quiet for a moment, considering. Traditionally, there would be a formal bonding ceremony within the week. Public vows, witnessed by the elders, sealed with. He trailed off, a faint hint of color touching his cheeks. "Well, sealed." Harper's face heated. She'd heard whispers about bonding ceremonies her whole life, knew they involved more than just words and witnesses. The thought of standing before the pack again, of making promises she still wasn't sure she understood, made her stomach twist with anxiety. Lucian must have sensed her distress, because his grip on her hand tightened slightly. "But we don't have to follow tradition exactly. Not if you're not ready." He met her eyes. "I meant what I said earlier. You set the pace. I don't know what pace I want." Harper pulled her hand free and pressed it against her ribs again, feeling the steady pulse of the mark. 3 years I spent convincing myself this wasn't real. Now everyone knows it is, and I'm supposed to just accept it? Step into the role of queen like I was born for it? No one expects you to have all the answers right now. "Don't they?" Harper looked up at him. "The pack is out there celebrating. They think everything is settled, that we're—" She gestured helplessly between them. "Whatever we're supposed to be." Lucian shifted closer, reducing the space between them by half. What we're supposed to be is whatever we choose, he said. The bond gives us connection, Harper. Foundation. But everything else, how we build on that foundation, what kind of partnership we create, that's up to us. Harper studied his face, looking for certainty or expectation, but found only patience. The same steady calm he'd shown at the stream, when she'd been ready to bolt into unclaimed territory rather than face what the mark meant. I need time, she said, to understand this, to understand you. Then take it. Lucian stood and moved to the table, giving her space. We can stay here as long as you need. The pack will manage without me for a few days. The offer surprised her. You do that? Just hide away with me? I'd hardly call it hiding. He glanced back at her, something warm flickering in his eyes. But yes, if that's what you need to feel safe, to learn to trust this, I'd spend a month here without complaint. Harper's throat tightened. She'd spent so long believing she meant nothing to him, that the bond was some cosmic mistake, and now here he was offering to put his entire territory on hold just to give her time to breathe. I don't need a month, she said quietly, but maybe a few days? Lucian's expression softened with relief. A few days. He pulled bread and cheese from a cloth-wrapped bundle on the table and brought it to her. Eat, then we'll talk more. Harper took the food gratefully and ate in silence while Lucian moved around the cabin, stoking the fire and tidying things that didn't really need tidying. She watched him as she chewed, noticing the way he moved, the careful control in every gesture. He was a large man, built for strength, but there was nothing clumsy or thoughtless in the way he inhabited space. When she'd finished eating, Harper set the plate aside and shifted to the edge of the bed. Her feet protested the movement but held her weight. Lucian noticed immediately and turned, his brow furrowing with concern. You shouldn't be walking yet. I'm not an invalid. Harper took a careful step, then another. Pain flared, but it was bearable. I've had worse injuries. Lucian looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he moved closer, positioning himself within easy reach in case she stumbled. Harper appreciated the gesture, even as it frustrated her. She wasn't used to being cared for, wasn't sure how to accept help without feeling like she was surrendering something important. She made it to the window and looked out at the forest beyond. Afternoon was sliding into evening, the light going soft and amber. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear music and laughter, the pack still celebrating. They really are happy, she said softly. They are. Lucian came to stand beside her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. A bonded alpha is a stronger alpha. The pack feels that security. Harper turned to look at him, at the strong line of his jaw and the way the fading light caught in his dark hair. And you? Are you happy? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Lucian's eyes widened slightly, then softened into something almost vulnerable. I've spent 5 years feeling incomplete, he said quietly, searching for something I couldn't name, wondering if I'd ever find it. And then tonight, he turned to face her fully. Tonight, I walked into that hall and everything I'd been missing just clicked into place. His hand lifted, hesitating near her face. So yes, Harper, I'm happy. Terrified and overwhelmed and still trying to process it all, but happy. Harper's breath caught. She'd been so focused on her own fear, her own uncertainty, that she hadn't considered what this might feel like for him. He'd been searching while she'd been hiding, both of them lost in their own ways. Slowly, giving herself time to change her mind, Harper reached up and took his hand. She brought it to her face and pressed his palm against her cheek, letting herself lean into the warmth of his touch. Lucian made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a groan. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "I want to kiss you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't, unless you tell me you want it too." Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about the night she'd spent running, the years she'd spent hiding, all the moments she'd convinced herself this could never be real. And then she thought about the way Lucian had knelt beside her in the stream, the way he'd tended her wounds, the way he'd promised patience she didn't know if she deserved. "I want it," she whispered back. Lucian leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was soft and careful, nothing like the claiming she'd half expected. It felt like a question being asked, an invitation extended. Harper's eyes fluttered closed. She let herself sink into the sensation, into the warmth of his mouth and the gentle pressure of his hand still cupped against her face. The mark on her ribs pulsed with heat, responding to the contact, but it didn't burn. Instead, it sang, a note of recognition and rightness that resonated through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. Harper almost laughed. "For what?" "For trying. For staying. For giving this a chance when you could have kept running." Harper's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I know." Lucian pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "That's all right. We'll figure it out together." The words echoed what he'd said before she'd fallen asleep, and Harper felt something in her chest begin to unknot. Maybe she didn't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe it was enough to take one small step at a time, to let herself be seen and held without having to understand everything all at once. Outside, the celebration continued, but here, in the quiet cabin, Harper let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop fighting, to lean into the bond instead of away from it, to trust that the man standing before her, patient and steady, might actually be exactly what her battered heart needed. "A few days," she said softly. "Let's start there." Lucian smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "A few days," he agreed. Harper woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of something cooking. She blinked against the brightness, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. The cabin. Lucian. Everything that had happened at the stream. Her hand moved instinctively to her ribs. The mark pulsed warm beneath her fingers, steady and sure, no longer burning with the desperate heat she'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. She sat up slowly, testing her body. Her feet ached, but the sharp pain had dulled to something manageable. Her palms stung less than yesterday. The exhaustion that had pulled her under had lifted, leaving behind a clarity she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Lucian stood at the hearth, his back to her, tending something in a cast-iron pan over the fire. He'd rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, and Harper found herself watching the way muscles shifted beneath his skin as he worked. He must have heard her move because he glanced back over his shoulder. His face softened when he saw she was awake. "Morning," he said quietly. "How do you feel?" "Better." Harper shifted to the edge of the bed, letting her bandaged feet touch the floor. "Stronger." "Good." Lucian turned back to the pan. "There's fresh water in the basin if you want to wash. Breakfast will be ready soon." The domesticity of the moment struck Harper as surreal. Yesterday morning, she'd been preparing to flee a mating ceremony. Now she was waking in the Alpha's cabin, watching him cook breakfast like they'd done this 1,000 times before. She made her way to the small basin near the window, moving carefully on her tender feet. The water was cool and clean, and she splashed it over her face, washing away the last cobwebs of sleep. When she turned back, Lucian was plating food onto 2 wooden dishes. He carried them to the table and set them down, then pulled out a chair for her. Harper crossed his jabot sur lace him and sat, suddenly aware of how rumpled she must look in yesterday's torn dress, her hair loose and tangled around her shoulders. But Lucian didn't seem to notice or care. He took the seat across from her and handed her a fork. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes. The food was simple, but good. Eggs and bread and some kind of smoked meat Harper didn't recognize. Her stomach growled its appreciation. "I need to return to the pack today," Lucian said eventually, his tone careful. "There are things I can't delegate any longer. The ceremony yesterday. It left loose ends that need addressing." Harper's fork stilled halfway to her mouth. "The ceremony I ran from?" "Yes." He met her eyes without flinching. "Marin will need to formally dissolve what was started. Make it clear to any visiting packs that the situation is resolved." Guilt twisted in Harper's chest. She'd been so focused on her own fear that she hadn't thought about the political complications her flight might have caused. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to create problems for you." Lucian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You didn't create problems. You reacted to an impossible situation the only way you knew how." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But we do need to address it properly now. Together." The word together sent a flutter through Harper's stomach. Not alone. Not hiding. Together. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I stand before the pack and speak the formal claiming vow, the one meant for a true mate, not an arranged partnership." Lucian's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "And it means you stand with me, let them see you, see the mark, hear you accept the bond in your own words." Harper's throat went dry. "In front of everyone? The elders at minimum." "But word will spread regardless." He paused. "I know it's frightening, but it's the only way to settle this completely. To make sure no one questions the legitimacy of our bond or your place in the pack." Harper looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers dwarfed hers. Yesterday, she'd been ready to run into unclaimed territory and never look back. Now he was asking her to walk into the center of pack life and claim her place as his mate. "When?" she asked. "This afternoon, before sunset." His voice gentled. "I know it's fast. If you need more time." "No." Harper surprised herself with the firmness in her tone. "You're right. Hiding won't help anything." She looked up at him. "And I meant what I said yesterday. I want to try." Something fierce and warm blazed in Lucian's eyes. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her bandaged knuckles. "You won't be alone up there," he promised. "I'll be right beside you." They finished breakfast in silence, the weight of the afternoon settling between them. When Harper stood to help clear the dishes, Lucian waved her off. "Rest your feet. I'll handle this." But Harper shook her head. "I've been resting. I need to move, to do something normal before," she gestured vaguely, "before everything changes." Lucian studied her for a moment, then nodded. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. Harper washed while he dried, the simple task grounding her in a way sitting still never could. When they finished, Lucian disappeared into a back room and returned with a bundle of dark blue fabric. "For you," he said, holding it out. "Something clean to wear." Harper unfolded the fabric and found a dress. Simple, but well made. The color somewhere between twilight and deep water. She looked up at him, questions forming. "I sent word to your mother last night," Lucian explained. "Asked her to bring something appropriate. She left it on the porch this morning while we slept." Emotion clogged Harper's throat. Her mother had been here, close enough to knock, but had respected the space Harper needed enough not to intrude. "Thank you," she managed. Lucian nodded toward the back room. You can change in there. Take your time." Harper carried the dress into the small space and closed the door. The room held a narrow bed and a chest of drawers, clearly meant for guests or storage. She stripped off yesterday's ruined dress and let it fall to the floor. For a moment she stood in just her underclothes, looking down at the mark on her ribs. It glowed softly in the dim light, the silver gold lines intricate and beautiful. She traced the edge of it with one finger, feeling the warmth pulse beneath her touch. 3 years she'd hidden this. 3 years of pain and loneliness and fear. But standing here now, about to step into her future instead of running from it, Harper felt something shift inside her chest. Not certainty. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of acceptance. She pulled on the new dress, grateful when it fit perfectly. Her mother had always been skilled with measurements. The fabric was soft against her skin, and the color made her feel stronger somehow. More visible. When she emerged, Lucian looked up from where he'd been stoking the fire. His eyes widened slightly, then warmed with unmistakable appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Harper's cheeks heated. She wasn't used to being looked at like that, like she was something precious worth seeing. "We should go soon," she said, deflecting, "before I lose my nerve." Lucian crossed to her and offered his hand. "Together." Harper hesitated only a moment before placing her palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and she felt the mark on her ribs sing in response. They walked through the forest slowly, accommodating Harper's tender feet. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine branches overhead, dappling the path with light and shadow. Around them, the forest hummed with life, birdsong and wind, and the distant rush of water. As they drew closer to the main settlement, Harper began to hear voices. The pack was gathering, word having spread that the Alpha was returning with his mate. Her steps faltered. Lucian felt it immediately and stopped, turning to face her. "What do you need?" he asked quietly. Harper looked toward the village, hidden behind the trees, then back at him. "Tell me what happens. Exactly." Lucian nodded. "We'll walk to the gathering hall. The elders will be waiting on the platform outside. Marin will speak first, formally dissolving yesterday's ceremony and declaring it void." He paused. "Then I'll speak the claiming vow. It's old language, traditional. I'll say it in front of the pack and place my hand over your mark. And then? Then you respond, however you want. There are formal words you can use, or you can speak from your heart." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Either way, all you need to do is accept the bond publicly. Make it clear you're choosing this." Harper's heart hammered. "And after that?" "After that, you're recognized as my mate and the pack's queen. Officially and irrevocably." Lucian's voice softened. "And we figure out the rest as we go." Harper drew in a slow breath, then another. The fear was still there, coiled in her stomach like a living thing. But beneath it, something else had begun to grow, something that felt almost like hope. "All right," she said, "I'm ready." They emerged from the tree line together, and Harper's breath caught. The entire pack had gathered in the clearing around the hall, hundreds of wolves in human form standing in loose circles, all eyes turning toward them as they appeared. Harper's first instinct was to pull back, to hide behind Lucian, or run back into the forest. But his hand tightened around hers, anchoring her, and she forced herself to keep walking. The crowd parted to let them through, faces blurring past. Harper caught glimpses of people she knew. Neighbors, friends, acquaintances. Some smiled. Others watched with open curiosity, but no one looked hostile or disapproving. The platform outside the hall stood in the center of the clearing, elevated just enough to be visible from all sides. The elders waited there, 7 of them, all gray-haired and solemn. Marin stood at the center, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Lucian led Harper up the 3 wooden steps, and they stood together facing the assembled pack. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Marin stepped forward, her voice carrying across the clearing with surprising strength. 2 nights passed. We gathered to witness a mating ceremony, an arrangement meant to secure alliance and strengthen bonds between packs. She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. But fate had other plans. A murmur ran through the assembly. Harper felt every eye on her, on the place where Lucian's hand still held hers. Yesterday morning, the true bond revealed itself. Marin continued, witnessed by moon and sun, marked in silver and gold. The Alpha's mate was found, not through arrangement, but through the ancient choosing. Marin turned to look at Harper directly, and the elder's expression softened with something that looked almost like pride. Harper Wilde, daughter of Evelyn and Thomas Wilde, bears the mark of the thorn line upon her skin. The bond is true and cannot be denied. She raised her voice. The ceremony begun 2 nights ago is hereby dissolved and declared void. What was attempted in arrangement gives way to what fate has chosen. The pack murmured their acknowledgement, the sound rolling through the clearing like wind through trees. Marin stepped back, and Lucian moved forward. He released Harper's hand only long enough to turn and face her fully, then took both her hands in his. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of tradition and the warmth of something deeply personal. I, Lucian Thorne, Alpha of the Crescent Pack, claim Harper Wilde as my true mate before moon and sun, before pack and witness. He lifted one of her hands and pressed it over his heart. I vow to protect her with my strength, to cherish her with my devotion, and to honor her as my equal in all ways that matter. He released her hands and moved slowly, giving her time to stop him, reaching for the hem of her dress. Harper's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Lucian lifted the fabric just enough to reveal the mark on her ribs. It blazed to life at his touch, glowing so brightly that people at the back of the crowd gasped. The silver gold lines pulsed with light, intricate and unmistakable. Lucian placed his palm directly over the mark. The moment his skin made contact, the light flared brighter, and Harper felt warmth flood through her entire body. She is mine to stand beside, Lucian said, his voice rough with emotion. And I am hers for as long as we both live, the pack erupted, not in murmurs this time, but in full-throated howls of acceptance and joy. The sound rose into the afternoon sky, fierce and wild and full of celebration. Through it all, Lucian's eyes never left Harper's face. His hand remained steady over her mark, warm and grounding. Marin raised one hand, and the howling gradually subsided. She looked at Harper with expectation and encouragement. Harper Wilde, the elder said gently, the pack waits to hear you speak. Harper's mouth went dry. Every person in the clearing watched her, waiting for her response, waiting to hear if she would accept what Lucian had just claimed. She looked at Lucian, at the steadiness in his gray eyes, the patience written in every line of his face. He had promised her time, had promised to let her set the pace. But here, now, standing before the entire pack with his hand over her heart and the bond blazing between them, Harper realized she didn't need more time. She needed to stop running. Harper drew in a breath and found her voice. It came out softer than she'd intended, but it carried. 3 years ago, this mark appeared on my skin. I didn't understand it. I was afraid of what it meant. She paused, steadying herself. So I hid. I covered it, and convinced myself it wasn't real. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Harper pushed on. But it was real, and it burned. And I spent 3 years carrying it alone because I was too afraid to believe I could be chosen for something this important. Her eyes found her mother in the crowd, saw the tears streaming down her face, the pride and sorrow mingling there. Yesterday I ran because I was still afraid, still convinced this had to be a mistake. Harper looked back at Lucian. But he followed me. He knelt beside me in the water, and he asked instead of demanding. He tended my wounds and promised me patience. She reached up slowly and placed her hand over Lucian's, where it rested against her mark. The light pulsed brighter at the contact. "I accept this bond," Harper said, her voice growing stronger. "I accept Lucian Thorne as my mate, freely and without coercion." She looked out at the watching pack. "I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know if I'll be good at this. But I'm choosing to try." The pack erupted again, louder this time, howls and cheers mixing together in a cacophony of approval. Lucian's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire expression, fierce joy blazing in his eyes. Marin stepped forward one final time, her voice cutting through the celebration. "The bond is witnessed and accepted. Harper Wilde is recognized as mate to Alpha Lucian Thorne and Queen of the Crescent Pack." She raised both hands. "Let it be known to all territories. The Alpha's mate has been found, and the pack is whole." The howling reached a crescendo, shaking the trees around the clearing. Lucian pulled Harper against him, wrapping his arms around her as the pack celebrated around them. Harper let herself lean into his warmth, let herself be held and seen and claimed in front of everyone who mattered. The fear was still there, hovering at the edges. But for the first time in 3 years, it didn't control her. She had chosen, and she had been chosen. And whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The celebration swept around them like a tide, but Lucian kept Harper anchored at the center of it all, his arms steady around her waist. Pack members pressed forward, voices rising in congratulations and welcome. Harper felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of goodwill, the hands reaching to touch her arm or shoulder in blessing, the faces blurring past in a wash of smiles and tears. Lucian guided her through it with practiced ease, accepting well wishes while subtly steering them toward the hall's entrance. Harper's feet had begun to throb again, the bandages doing little to cushion the weight she'd been standing on for far too long. "Almost there," Lucian murmured against her ear, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Just a few more steps." They crossed the threshold into the hall's cool interior, and the noise dropped to a more bearable level. Harper sagged slightly with relief, and Lucian's grip tightened immediately. "Your feet," he said, not a question. Harper nodded, too tired to pretend otherwise. "They're fine, just sore." Lucian made a sound that suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't argue. Instead, he guided her through the main hall toward a door at the back, one Harper had never noticed before. It opened onto a narrow corridor lit by oil lamps, leading deeper into the building. "My private quarters," Lucian explained as they walked. "No one will disturb us there." The corridor ended at a heavy wooden door carved with intricate designs. Lucian pushed it open and ushered Harper inside, then closed it firmly behind them. The room beyond was larger than Harper expected, but still felt intimate. A wide bed dominated one wall, covered in dark furs and woven blankets. A stone fireplace took up most of the opposite wall, already laid with wood waiting to be lit. Windows overlooked the forest, framed with simple curtains. Everything was clean and well kept, but surprisingly sparse. No personal items cluttered the surfaces. No decorations or mementos marked the space as lived in. It struck Harper as lonely somehow, like Lucian had been waiting for something before making this place truly his own. "Sit," Lucian said gently, guiding her toward the bed. Let me check your bandages. Harper sank down onto the edge of the mattress with a soft exhale of relief. The moment she took weight off her feet, the throbbing intensified to something sharper. She must have winced because Lucian dropped to his knees in front of her immediately, his hands gentle as he reached for her ankle. "Tell me if this hurts," he said, carefully unwinding the first bandage. Harper gritted her teeth as the fabric pulled away from the cuts. The wounds had closed somewhat, but they were still raw, still angry-looking in the fading afternoon light. Lucian examined them with focused attention, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have been walking on these," he said quietly. "Not for that long. I had to." Harper looked down at his bent head, at the way his dark hair fell forward to hide his expression. Running from it wouldn't have helped. Lucian glanced up at her, something soft and fierce in his eyes. "You're braver than you think." Harper's throat tightened. She didn't feel brave. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed, and still half convinced she'd wake up to find this was all some elaborate dream. Lucian rewrapped her foot with clean linen he produced from a chest near the hearth, then moved to check the other. His touch remained gentle throughout, careful not to cause more pain than necessary. When he finished with her feet, he reached for her hands. The cuts on her palms had scabbed over, but they pulled uncomfortably when she flexed her fingers. Lucian cleaned them with fresh water and applied a salve that smelled of herbs and honey. "Better?" he asked when he'd wrapped the last bandage. "Yes, thank you." Lucian stood and moved to the fireplace, crouching to light the kindling. Flames caught and spread, filling the room with warm, flickering light as the sun began its descent outside the windows. Harper watched him work, this man who was now her mate, trying to reconcile everything she'd believed about him with the reality kneeling at her hearth. He moved with such careful precision, such quiet competence, nothing wasted, nothing showy. "You don't have to take care of me," Harper said softly. "I know you have other responsibilities." Lucian looked back at her over his shoulder. "Taking care of you is my responsibility now. The one I actually want." He stood and crossed back to her, settling onto the bed beside her. Not crowding, but close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Close enough that Harper could feel the warmth radiating from him. "The pack will manage without me for a few hours," he continued. "Marin knows to handle anything urgent. Right now," he turned to face her more fully, "right now, I need to make sure you're all right. That you have everything you need." Harper looked down at her bandaged hands. "I don't know what I need." "Then we'll figure it out." Lucian's hand moved to cover hers, careful of the fresh bandages. One step at a time. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling and settling, the sounds of celebration still audible in the distance. Harper felt the exhaustion of the past 2 days catching up with her, weighing down her limbs and making her thoughts feel thick and slow. "You should rest," Lucian said eventually. "Today was a lot." Harper nodded but didn't move. She was tired, bone deep, tired but also reluctant to let go of this moment. This quiet space where it was just the two of them, no pack watching, no expectations pressing down. "Will you stay?" she asked, the words coming out smaller than intended. Lucian's expression softened. "Of course. This is our space now. I'm not going anywhere." "Our space." The words sent a flutter through Harper's chest. She looked around the room again, trying to imagine herself here. Waking in this bed, sitting by this fire, sharing this space with Lucian, day after day. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt almost possible. Lucian stood and moved to the windows, drawing the curtains against the deepening twilight. Then he turned back to Harper, his expression careful. "The bed is yours tonight. I can sleep in the chair." Harper's eyes widened. You don't have to do that. I know. He crossed his arms, leaning against the window frame. But I meant what I said about letting you set the pace. We're bonded in the eyes of the pack, but that doesn't mean you owe me anything you're not ready to give. Harper studied him in the firelight. His posture looked relaxed, but she could see tension in the line of his shoulders, in the careful way he held himself apart. He was giving her space even though she could sense it cost him. "Lucian," she said softly, "come here." He moved toward her slowly, stopping a few feet from the bed, waiting. Harper patted the space beside her. "Sit with me, please." Lucian obeyed, settling onto the mattress with careful distance between them. Harper shifted closer, closing some of that distance, and felt him go very still. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, "of this, of what it means, of everything changing so fast. I know. But I don't want you sleeping in a chair because you think I need protecting from you." Harper turned to face him. "You've been nothing but patient with me. Kind. You've given me choices when you could have just demanded." Lucian's jaw tightened. "I would never demand. Not that." "I know." Harper reached up slowly and placed her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her hand. "That's why I'm asking you to stay. Here, with me." His breath caught. "Harper." "Just to sleep," she clarified quickly. I'm not ready for..." She felt heat climb her cheeks. "I know what you mean." Lucian covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his heart. "And I'll stay, as close or as far as you need me to be." Relief flooded through Harper, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to not be alone tonight, to have him near without pressure or expectation. "Thank you," she whispered. They prepared for sleep with quiet efficiency. Lucian banked the fire while Harper removed her shoes and loosened her hair. When she slipped beneath the furs, he joined her, staying on top of the blankets and keeping a careful distance. But after a moment, Harper reached out in the darkness. Her fingers found his and she laced them together. "Is this all right?" she asked. Lucian's grip tightened around hers. "Yes, more than all right." Harper let her eyes close, feeling the steady warmth of his hand in hers. The mark on her ribs pulsed softly, no longer burning but singing with a contentment she'd never felt before. Outside the window, the pack's celebration continued, joy echoing through the night. But here, in the quiet dark, Harper felt something else beginning. Something fragile and new, and worth protecting. She'd spent 3 years running from this bond. Now, lying beside Lucian with their hands joined and the future stretching uncertain before them, Harper let herself finally stop. "Lucian?" she whispered into the darkness. "I'm here. I'm glad." Harper squeezed his hand. "I'm glad it's you." She felt more than heard his sharp intake of breath. Then his voice came, rough with emotion. "I'm glad it's you too." Harper's breathing slowly evened out as sleep pulled her under. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her was Lucian's thumb brushing gentle circles across her knuckles, a steady rhythm that promised safety and patience and time. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited them as Alpha and Queen, they would face it together. For now, that was enough. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the celebration gradually quieted as the pack settled for the night. And in the Alpha's chamber, 2 souls who had searched and hidden and finally found each other rested in the first peace either had known in years. The bond hummed between them, steady and sure, no longer a source of pain, but a promise of belonging. And as moonlight filtered through the window to paint silver across the firs, Harper Wild slept without fear for the first time since the mark had burned itself into her skin. She had been chosen. She had chosen in return. And the future, uncertain as it was, held hope.